The morning sun slipped gently through the half-drawn curtains, painting golden lines across the quiet room. Tu Diem woke first. For a moment, she simply lay there, listening to the steady rhythm of Toan's breathing beside her. His presence was her calm after years of chaos, the one thing that made her believe peace could be real again. She reached out, lightly brushing his hair away from his forehead. Toan stirred, opening his eyes to find her watching him. That soft smile of hers, shy yet sincere, made his chest tighten with warmth. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice low and slightly husky. Tu Diem smiled, whispering, "You should rest a bit more. You worked late last night." But Toan shook his head, already sitting up, the sunlight catching on the crisp white of his shirt. "I have a meeting today," he said with a playful grin, "and a surprise reunion to attend." The word reunion made her pause. She hadn't heard it in years. The class reunion of people she once knew, people who once looked down on her. She turned away quickly, pretending to smooth the sheets. "You're really going?" "Of course," Toan said, adjusting his tie. "And you're coming with me?" She froze. "Me?" Toan nodded, stepping closer. "Why not? You were part of that class too. You have every right to stand there, no less than anyone." His tone was firm but kind, filled with the quiet authority that made people trust him. Tu Diem's hands trembled slightly as she buttoned his sleeve. "They won't understand." "They don't need to," Toan replied softly. He tilted her chin up with a gentle touch. "Let them see who you truly are." For a moment, silence filled the room, the kind that carries both fear and courage. When Toan left, Diem stood by the doorway, watching his car disappear down the street. The breeze from the open window brushed her hair as she whispered to herself, "Can I really face them again?" The clock ticked steadily in the background, each second pulling her closer to a past she thought she'd buried, and a truth that was about to change everything. The cafe shimmered under the late afternoon sun, its glass walls reflecting the city's golden light. Inside, laughter and the clinking of cups filled the air as old classmates greeted one another with cheerful voices, voices that carried both nostalgia and hidden judgment. Tu Diem hesitated at the entrance. Her simple cream dress fluttered slightly as she stepped in, her eyes scanning faces that once belonged to her past. Some people turned, their smiles fading into polite surprise. Others whispered softly, their eyes flickering with curiosity and something sharper. "Is that Tu Diem?" someone murmured near the counter. "She looks different," another whispered back. "Didn't she marry young? I heard things didn't go well." Each word brushed against her like invisible thorns. But she kept her head high, holding her small clutch close to her chest, her expression calm. Years of hardship had taught her that silence could be stronger than any defense. A group of women waved her over. "Diem, it's been forever. Sit with us." Their smiles were too bright to be sincere. She sat down, offered a small smile, and nodded politely as they spoke, mostly about their successful lives, new houses, and luxury vacations. "And you, Diem?" one of them finally asked, pretending to sound curious. "What are you doing now?" Tu Diem hesitated. "I'm helping with some projects," she said softly. "Oh, projects. That sounds nice," another said, hiding a smirk behind her cup. "Must be small ones, right?" The laughter that followed was soft but sharp. It stung not because of what they said, but because it reminded her of the years she'd spent proving she was worth more than their pity. Before she could reply, a sudden hush swept through the room. The door opened, and every head turned. Toan walked in. He didn't need to announce who he was. His quiet confidence, his sharp suit, and the air of authority around him spoke louder than any introduction. Conversations faltered, even the waiters paused. Tu Diem's breath caught. She hadn't expected him to come so soon. Toan's gaze searched the room until it found her. For a brief second, his expression softened. Then, with calm precision, he walked toward her. The click of his shoes against the marble floor was the only sound that echoed through the room. Someone whispered, "That's CEO Toan, isn't it? The one who runs the construction group. What's he doing here? Toan stopped beside Tu Diem's table. The air grew thick with curiosity. Without a word, he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and looked at everyone around. His voice was steady, clear enough for the whole cafe to hear. I believe you all know Tu Diem, he said. But perhaps you don't know who she truly is. The room went silent. She's not just my classmate, Toan continued, his eyes unwavering. She's the woman who once saved my life, and the woman I love. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to vanish. Tu Diem froze, her heart pounding. Around her faces shifted from disbelief, to shock, to something softer. Guilt, perhaps. Toan didn't look away. You should know her for who she really is, not for what you used to think she was. The words lingered in the air, heavy and undeniable. And in that moment, for the first time in years, Tu Diem felt seen. Tu Diem felt her hands grow cold. Every pair of eyes seemed to pierce her, curious, doubtful, envious. Some smiled awkwardly. Others looked away, pretending not to stare. Toan remained still, his hand still resting lightly on her shoulder, the calm center of the storm. You don't need to explain anything to them, he said quietly, leaning closer. His voice, meant only for her, steadied her trembling heart. She looked up at him, and in his eyes, she saw something unshakable, belief. One of the former classmates, a woman dressed in glittering jewelry, forced a laugh. Oh, come on, Toan. We're just surprised. We never thought you two were close. Toan's lips curved slightly, not in amusement but warning. That's because you only ever saw what you wanted to see. The woman's smile faltered. Around them, a heavy silence returned, this time, uncomfortable. Tu Diem wanted to speak, to break the tension, but her voice felt trapped somewhere between fear and gratitude. She managed only a whisper, Toan, maybe we should. But he shook his head gently. No. You've spent too long running away from them. Let them face the truth this time. For the first time, Diem straightened her back fully. The faint tremor in her voice disappeared when she spoke again, softly but clearly. I didn't come here to prove anything, she said, her gaze moving from one face to another. I just wanted to see how everyone was doing. Life hasn't been easy for me, but I'm grateful for where I am now. No one dared to mock her this time. Something in her tone, fragile yet steady, silenced the room more effectively than any of Toan's authority. When they finally left the cafe, the sun had already dipped behind the skyline. The streets shimmered with the first drops of rain. Tu Diem walked beside Toan without a word, her mind still spinning from what had happened. You shouldn't have done that, she murmured. Now they'll talk even more. Toan glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Let them talk. They'll always talk. What matters is that you finally stood where you belong, beside me. The raindrops grew heavier, but neither of them moved to run for cover. Instead, Toan took off his jacket and placed it gently over her shoulders. For a moment, the world seemed too quiet around them, just the rhythm of the rain, the city lights, and two hearts that no longer needed to hide. The next morning began with silence, the kind that feels too heavy, like the world was holding its breath. Tu Diem sat by the window, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold. Outside, the city was alive with noise, but inside, everything felt still. Her phone buzzed again and again on the table, notifications lighting up the screen. She didn't have to look to know what they were. Her classmates had posted pictures from the reunion. Captions bloomed beneath them, some harmless, others poisoned with envy. Who knew Tu Diem would show up with CEO Toan? So that's how she made a comeback. Money really changes everything. Her throat tightened. The words stung not because they were cruel, but because they were familiar, echoes of the same whispers she thought she'd left behind. The bedroom door opened softly. Toan stepped in, dressed in a white shirt with his sleeves rolled up, his expression unreadable. He set his phone down on the table and walked toward her. They're talking online, she said before he could speak. Her voice was steady, but her fingers trembled around the cup. They think I'm with you because of your name, your money. Toan knelt beside her, gently taking her hands into his. Diem, he said quietly, they don't know you, they never tried to, and they don't matter. Her eyes filled, but she held them back. It's easy for you to say that. You've never been judged like I have. Toan's gaze softened. You're right, I haven't lived your pain, but I've seen it every day. You tried to rebuild yourself, piece by piece. That's why I won't let anyone drag you down again. He reached for his phone, opened the public statement he had written earlier, and handed it to her. She read in silence. Tu Diem is not defined by rumors or her past. She is a woman of strength, kindness, and integrity. The one who once risked her life to save mine. If you wish to speak of her, speak with respect. Toan, CEO of Mintoan Group. Tu Diem's heart ached. You didn't have to post this, she whispered. Yes, I did. His tone was gentle but firm. You protected me when I had nothing. Now it's my turn. For the first time that day, she smiled, a small, fragile thing, but real. She leaned her head against his shoulder. They'll still talk, she murmured. Then let them, he said, wrapping an arm around her. The world can keep its noise. We'll build our peace anyway. Outside, the rain began again, light, silver threads falling against the window. And in that quiet room, beneath the hum of a restless city, two people sat together, not untouched by the world's cruelty, but strong enough to face it side by side. Days passed. The noise of gossip began to fade, as all storms eventually do. But for Tu Diem, the silence that followed wasn't emptiness, it was peace. She walked into the same cafe one afternoon, the very place where everything had begun. The same sunlight filtered through the glass, but this time, she didn't feel small. She ordered a cup of milk tea, sat by the window, and simply watched the world go by. For the first time in years, she wasn't hiding from her past, she was sitting face to face with it. A familiar voice broke her thoughts. Diem, she turned. It was one of her former classmates, the same woman who had once laughed behind her back. Today, her voice was softer. I saw the news. What Toan wrote. I didn't know you went through all that. Tu Diem smiled faintly. It's all right. We all grow differently. The woman hesitated, then whispered, You're really lucky to have someone like him. Tu Diem shook her head gently. No, I'm lucky that after everything, I learned to believe in myself again. Toan just helped me remember that. They spoke for a few minutes more, this time, without judgment, without masks. When her classmate left, Diem stayed behind, feeling something loosen inside her, the last remnants of the pain she used to carry. Outside, a familiar car stopped by the curb. Toan stepped out, his suit jacket in one hand, a calm smile in his eyes. You came here alone. He teased lightly. I needed to, she replied. I wanted to see if I could sit here and feel nothing, and I did. I'm free, Toan. He smiled, pride and affection flickering across his face. You've always been free, Diem, you just needed to see it. They walked out together, the wind carrying the scent of rain and jasmine from a nearby stall. As they crossed the street, Toan reached for her hand, not as a shield this time, but as an equal. She looked at him, her heart calm. You know, she said softly, if I ever have to go back there again, I won't be afraid. He squeezed her hand gently. You won't have to go back alone. The city lights began to flicker on, painting gold and silver reflections across the wet pavement. In the distance, laughter echoed from somewhere, faint, ordinary, alive. Tu Diem smiled. For the first time, it wasn't a smile to please anyone or to hide her pain. It was simply the smile of a woman who had finally forgiven her past and chosen her future. And beside her, Toan walked quietly, his fingers intertwined with hers, as if reminding her that love was never about rescue. It was about standing together, even when the world tried to tear you apart.